Good evening, I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight. Immigration reset. The president signs executive orders reversing Trump administration policies on family separation, border security, and legal migration. Then, COVID relief. Negotiations continue on a major coronavirus relief bill. We speak to Republican Senator John Barrasso about the ongoing talks. And reopening schools. Debates over the risks and benefits of returning to in-person classes reach a fever pitch.
All we're asking for is for the federal government to provide the resources we need so we can reopen our schools, not only safely, but equitably.
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
For 25 years, Consumer Cellular's goal has been to provide wireless service that helps people communicate and connect. We offer a variety of no-contract plans, and our U.S.-based customer service team can help find one that fits you. To learn more, visit consumercellular.tv.
Johnson & Johnson. BNSF Railway.
John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
President Biden is out with a raft of initiatives tonight directed at the U.S. southern border. They come as the man who will manage migrant policy is joining his cabinet. White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor begins our coverage with a late afternoon event.
I'm going to sign a few executive orders.
President Biden focused on immigration and rolling back former President Trump's controversial policies. Today he signed 3 executive orders on the topic. Topping the list, the creation of a task force to reunite families separated at the U.S.-Mexico border under the Trump zero-tolerance policy.
With the first action today, we're going to work to undo the moral and national shame of the previous administration that literally, not figuratively, ripped children from the arms of their families, their mothers and fathers at the border, and with no plan, none whatsoever, to reunify the children who are still in custody and their parents.
The task force will be led by Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas.
Senators voting in the affirmative.
After several days of delays, this afternoon, the Senate confirmed him. Biden's orders were praised by several groups, including the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, an organization advocating for separated families. It called the president's actions a monumental first step. The group said, quote, "It is incumbent upon all our elected officials to end the rampant separation and detention of migrants." The American Civil Liberties Union tweeted, quote, "Biden must reunite all separated families in the U.S., and we can't stop there. These families deserve citizenship and care." White House officials say no one knows just how many children remain separated from their families. Federal court documents put the number at more than 600. Biden aides say it could be up to 1,000. Biden will be looking into whether some families, including parents deported without their children, will be given some sort of legal status in the United States. Today's executive actions also order a review of the Trump policies that restricted legal immigration. Those include the Remain in Mexico program that sent more than 60,000 asylum seekers back to Mexico to wait for their claims to be processed in U.S. courts. Many have been forced to wait in dangerous conditions. Some have even been kidnapped and killed. The Biden administration already announced it will no longer enroll new asylum seekers in the program. but it remains unclear what will happen to those already enrolled. Also today, President Biden ordered a review of the so-called public charge rule. It denies green cards to immigrants who might require taxpayer-funded financial assistance. Meanwhile, President Biden continues his push for a $1.9 trillion COVID-19 stimulus package.
Thanks for coming down.
Last night, he held a meeting with a group of Senate Republicans who want a far smaller bill. So far, no bipartisan deal has been reached. The senator said the meeting was, quote, frank and very useful. They pledged to continue their talks. Today, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki reiterated the president's call for bold action.
There certainly is a gap between where we are and where the proposal, the Republican proposal that was discussed last night.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Senate Republicans argued again for a smaller, more targeted approach that can win bipartisan support.
We're off to a totally partisan start. I think that's unfortunate, but they are in the majority in the House and Senate, and life is a series of choices, and they've chosen.
Democrats are forging ahead on a process to pass a bill with a simple majority in the 50-50 Senate if they cannot win Republican support. Today, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer insisted again there's no time to lose.
We are not going to dilute, dither, or delay. The needs of the American people are so demanding. We need to think big, and we need to act quickly.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Yamiche Alcindor.
And we turn now to the issues dividing lawmakers on Capitol Hill, that is, other issues, and that's with our Lisa Desjardins. So, Lisa, today we learn more about the impeachment trial that's going to start 1 week from today in the Senate. We learn more about the arguments each side is going to make. Tell us about that.
That's right. This unprecedented second impeachment trial for a U.S. president would start with the House Democrats, their brief on exactly the case they're going to lay out, an 80-page pretrial brief. Judy, I want to pull out one quote that kind of lays out what Democrats are arguing here. They say President Trump's effort to extend his grip on power by fomenting violence against Congress was a profound violation of the oath he swore. If provoking an insurrectionary riot is not an impeachable offense, it is hard to imagine what would be. Essentially, Democrats in the House are laying out a case where President Trump's own words were responsible for and intentional to try and cause a riot at the U.S. Capitol to stop the election of President Joe Biden. They also lay out a case where they say there is precedent for impeaching a former officer. Now, let's go to the president's case. His relatively new attorneys filed a 14-page answer. Their fuller brief, more lengthy brief is expected next week. But this is the first glimpse of what his attorneys will be arguing in court. And, Judy, they are planning to argue that the president was under his First Amendment protections to express his belief that the election was suspect in their words. Let's go to a quote from this document. Those attorneys write that insufficient evidence exists upon which a reasonable jurist could conclude that the 45th president's statements were accurate or not, and he therefore denies that they were false, essentially saying that the president could have been right about the election. And in addition, of course, his attorneys argue that this is a moot point because they say that there is not enough constitutional justification for trying a now former president.
So, Lisa, in connection with the assault on the Capitol, there's been a lot of discussion in recent weeks about security around lawmakers on the Hill. What are you learning about concerns about that during and around the impeachment trial and then in general?
We've confirmed that House Democratic leaders are considering a September 11th style commission that would be an independent look at the events of September 6th, who was behind them, what happened hour by hour, and the lead up to them, as well as the aftermath of them. In addition, House Democratic leaders are working on a potential emergency spending bill to increase security for lawmakers themselves. Now, the Sergeant at Arms has already moved forward with the idea of increasing security at airports, for example, in Washington, where lawmakers lawmakers land when they arrive here, or for some lawmakers who are under threat in their home districts. Now, this has really been behind the scenes a very serious emotional time, traumatic time for many members of Congress. And that came to bear last night on Instagram when Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez spent over an hour relaying her experience on January 6th. And she ended talking about the trauma that she and other members are facing.
They're trying to tell us that it wasn't a big deal. They're trying to tell us to move on without any accountability, without any truth-telling, or without actually confronting the extreme damage, physical harm, loss of life, and trauma that was inflicted on not just me as a person, not just other people as individuals, but on all of us as a collective.
Judy, it's not just mistrust of the Capitol, but a sense of betrayal by some members.
And meantime, quickly, Lisa, ideological divisions among Republicans over two high-profile members of the House, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the freshman congresswoman from Georgia, and Liz Cheney from Wyoming.
Right, Marjorie Taylor Greene, someone whose remarks are increasingly under attack or criticism from those in the middle, and Liz Cheney, who may face a vote on her leadership tomorrow. Last night, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, sent out this noteworthy statement about Marjorie Taylor Greene. He said that loony lies and conspiracy theories are cancer for the Republican Party and our country. Didn't mention her by name, but Judy, this is a very sharp intra-party fight.
So interesting that he weighed in. Lisa Desjardins covering it all for us at the Capitol. Thank you, Lisa. As we discussed earlier, the Biden administration and Senate Republicans continue to debate the merits and details of the president's $1.9 trillion COVID relief plan. Senator John Barrasso is the third highest-ranking Republican in the Senate, and he joins us now. Senator, welcome back to the NewsHour. What do you make of the efforts by 10 of your Republican colleagues to meet with the president, to try to hammer out something that all sides can agree on? Do you think it will bear fruit?
Well, I hope that it does, and I think it was a good idea to meet together in a bipartisan way, Judy, because we still need to do more to help people get back to work and to help kids get back to school and to put the virus behind us, to getting more shots into arms. You know, what the president has proposed, $1.9 trillion, is an awful lot of money. And the concern that Republicans have is it includes many things that are unrelated to coronavirus relief. You know, we just passed a $900 billion bill that was signed at the end of December, and so much of that money hasn't gone out the door yet. So we want to make sure that that is out there effectively doing its job, and then I think we can better prepare to see what additional needs there are.
As I'm sure you know, Senator, President Biden is arguing that it's the greater mistake would be to do not enough when so many people are suffering. You have, what, 18 million Americans at least who, as of this month, are still receiving unemployment benefits. How concerned are you about people who were earning in the middle class range but are now well below that or out of work altogether?
Well, I get home to Wyoming and talk to people every weekend about that very thing. And what I'm hearing at home is they say, there are people that really need help and we need to target that help. But when I see President Biden, including in his proposal, sending relief checks out to families where you can make over $250,000 a year, people don't want to see that sort of thing. In Wyoming, where we have help wanted signs out, small business owners who are struggling saying, if we have this mandatory doubling of the minimum wage, they're going to have a harder time making payroll and could have to close their doors. When they see that one of the things in the president's proposal is to pay unemployment bonuses, which would make it more, basically the math says you do better by not working than by working. It's harder to get people back to work. And the other thing that Republicans are very concerned about is these bailouts for big cities and blue states and places that really have a history of bad behavior when it comes to managing their finances unrelated to coronavirus.
Well, I'm sure you know that many of these cities and states say that that money goes toward people who are working on the front lines, police, first responders, and others. But we are going to continue to be looking at that. I do want to also ask you, Senator, about something that the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has said in the last day about Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia. He said, and I'm quoting, "Loony lies and conspiracy theories are cancer for the Republican Party and our country." He went on to refer to her view that perhaps no airplane hit the World Trade Center on 9/11, saying that horrifying school shootings where children died were pre-staged. Do you agree with him?
Well, yeah. I find her statements disturbing. That's not the future that I see for the Republican Party. I know the House is going to have to make its own decisions on what path they take, but all the time that is spent on her is distracting from the work we need to do for the American people, of getting people back to work and kids back to school and the coronavirus behind us.
And, Senator, I also want to ask you about another member of Congress, and that is your fellow Republican Liz Cheney, who represents the state of Wyoming, your home state. She has come under attack from other Republicans for voting to impeach President Trump. You had a Republican congressman go to Wyoming to say she shouldn't be reelected. Do you think she should be removed from a leadership role in the House based on what she's voted, what she's done?
No, I support Liz Cheney. We work closely together on issues impacting Wyoming. I will tell you, I have a different position on impeachment that she does. This is now coming to the Senate, and I believe that it's unconstitutional for us in the Senate to go through a trial of impeachment of somebody who is no longer in office, and the fact that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court isn't going to preside tells me that it is not a legitimate process.
Do you believe the president bears any responsibility for what happened, though, Senator, given that he urged that crowd to go fight, not to show weakness? What do you think his role was in all this?
Well, I wish he had chosen his words differently, but the House has now moved ahead with impeachment, and that is coming to the Senate. We have a trial starting next Tuesday in the United States Senate. 45 members of the Republicans in the Senate have already voted that it's unconstitutional to impeach somebody who's no longer in office. And at home, the people of Wyoming believe in fairness. What happened in the House was a rush to judgment. It was a snap impeachment without a hearing, without an opportunity for defense. And so I think that was rushed. And I think that the president is going to be acquitted when it comes to the United States Senate.
And do you think future presidents should be making similar statements?
Well, I think that first, in terms of past presidents, we shouldn't be impeaching people who are no longer in office or trying them in the Senate for impeachment. In terms of future presidents, to me, impeachment is about removing someone from the office to which they hold, removing a president from office. That, to me, is the way I read the Constitution, and that's what I think impeachment is all about.
All right, we will leave it there. Senator Barrasso, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Judy.
Now, for the Biden administration's take on the state of COVID relief talks, we are joined by Jared Bernstein. He's a member of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. Jared Bernstein, good to see you. Thank you for being with us. I want to ask you first about a report that came out yesterday by the Congressional Budget Office forecasting that the U.S. economy is going to recover rapidly by the middle of this year, which raises the question, does the government need to spend as much money as the administration is proposing to boost the economy?
Yeah, that's a really fair and important question. What that CBO report showed is that in the second half of this year, GDP would grow at about 4%. That's a good GDP growth rate. However, for far too many families, both throughout this crisis and even before this crisis, GDP growth has been a spectator sport. They have fallen behind even as the economy has expanded. This is often discussed under the rubric of economic inequality or racial injustice, and it's one of the huge motivating factors for President Biden and Vice President Harris when they campaign. Now, these inequities have been laid bare by this crisis, by this pandemic. It has been disproportionately felt by workers on the bottom leg of that K. You know, we talk about a K-shaped recovery with folks at the top who never missed a paycheck doing fine, and tens of millions of folks at the bottom who have been beset by both the health and the economic crisis. The American Rescue Plan targets that bottom leg of the K, along with virus control and vaccine distribution, to engender an inclusive recovery, not just a GDP number that doesn't reach many who need it.
Well, let me have several points to ask you about, and I'm going to move quickly. But it is reported today, Jared Bernstein, that the president told this group of Democratic senators, Republican senators he met with last night, that he gave them the clear indication he's willing to look at lowering the price tag overall. Is that true? And number one, and number two, how far?
So when I hear Joe Biden talk about this plan, I don't think he's referring to a top-line price tag. What he's talking about is as quickly and as efficiently as possible meeting the urgency of this crisis. He's talked about the cost of inaction in terms of jobs, in terms of kids out of school, in terms of parents who can't go back into the job market, in terms of numbers you yourself have mentioned, the 1 million people who claimed unemployment just last week, a bigger number than throughout the heart of the Great Recession. Now, in terms of price tag, the president is not going to settle for any package that fails to meet the urgency of the moment, to get shots into arm, to get school reopened, to get people back to work, to preserve businesses, to distribute the vaccine. And the American Rescue Plan is scaled to meet that challenge. What the president has said to Republicans is, come in all day and we'll talk about better, more efficient ways to meet that challenge, but we're not going to dial back the goals of this plan.
I hear you. So you're not, I hear you saying it's important, but you're not wedded to that 1.9. But what I want to ask you is something that Senator Barrasso raised, which is Congress passed aid last month in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And he's saying that money hasn't gotten out of the pipeline into people's pocketbooks yet. Why rush? Why not wait for that money to go out and see what's needed?
Because the American people cannot afford another episode of wait and see. I agreed with a lot of what Mr. Barrasso said. A lot of it resonated with me. I thought he had a sense of urgency until he started talking about wait and see. Yes, we have passed the bill in December, and that is helping people. But that bill ends. Many of the components of that bill end in March. And what we did last year is Congress did this wait and see exercise. This was before the December bill. They did this wait and see exercise. And what happened? Families lost work. Jobs began to decline. Consumer spending, which is 70% of this economy, actually contracted in November and December before that plan went into effect. We have to get ahead of this. The virus will only be beat. We'll only put it behind us. We'll only distribute and produce the vaccines if we help states and localities do what needs to be done. And we can't afford to wait another few months to see how this is going to work out. That way we fall behind the curve. Passing the American Rescue Plan as soon as possible gets us ahead of the curve, finally, so that we can finally launch a robust, inclusive, and racially equitable recovery.
So much more to ask you, Jared Bernstein. Quick question, yes or no? Is it possible that families earning $250,000 a year could end up benefiting from this aid? Yes or no?
I think that the discussions that are the ongoing discussions right now are very much about dealing with that targeting issue.
All right, a subject to continue to ask you about. Jared Bernstein, thank you very much.
Thank you.
As we reported earlier, President Biden did issue a number of executive orders on immigration today. These are the latest steps in what the new administration has pledged will be bold reforms, including a comprehensive plan to overhaul the entire U.S. immigration system. Amna Nawaz is here with a look at where these moves fit into that larger landscape.
That's right, Judy. Today's actions follow earlier executive orders from President Biden that he signed in his very first days in office, orders that immediately had an impact on thousands of people. We spoke to a few of them to get their reactions, and here's what they had to say.
My name is Jose Aguiluz. I'm 31 years old. I am a registered nurse that is currently working in COVID vaccinations, and I am a DACA recipient.
Mark J. Daniels. I'm the sheriff of Cochise County, Arizona, located in the southeast corner of the state of Arizona.
My name is Carla. I'm currently undocumented, but I recently applied for DACA for the first time in December.
My name is Rodolfo Karish. I go by Rudy. I retired from the U.S. Border Patrol in December of 2019 after spending more than 3 decades in the organization.
My name is Haya. I am 20 years old and I'm a first generation American. So my family and my sister are Syrian. I am currently living in Canada. We sought refuge here because of the Muslim ban.
When President Biden announced that he was going to strengthen DACA, was really a sense of relief, to be honest. It pretty much gave me a little bit of relief that I was going to be able to stay in the country and keep doing what I'm doing, keep taking care of my patients and everything. When I started with the Dream Act movement, it was like 10 years ago. I'm still a dreamer. I still have DACA. So 10 years have passed and there's still no solution.
When I saw that President Biden halted border issues to include the physical barrier, relooking at how we're doing business, to include the release program, releasing those that normally would be put back into Mexico or deported or held in a prosecutional level. It was a little disappointing. And I'll say this, I think it was hasty. What I've seen in the past is those that should be held accountable in the criminal justice system are not. And those that should be detained or deported are not. And then what happens is they move into communities and bad things happen.
There's always been that fear for myself that maybe I won't be allowed to stay here for a while. But there's at least a chance for me to get protection with DACA. Whereas with my family, they will be living under this fear for an indefinite amount of time. Undocumented immigrants still pay taxes. They still, go shopping, contribute to the economy, and are active members in their communities. And despite all that, we still live in fear every day that we don't feel welcome here.
You can't rush these things. You have to look at what previous administrations did to see what's working, rather than coming in with a wrecking ball to start off with and completely wipe out all of the initiatives that a prior administration has done. And I can tell you that where we put up wall or fences, it's deterred the flow of narcotics. So I think that you also have to look at other things that it does prevent.
When I was a senior in high school living in the United States with my extended family, my parents couldn't attend my graduation because of the Muslim ban. And when the Biden administration repealed the Muslim ban, it was an immense relief for us. We were very excited. And the first thing we did, of course, was talk to our family in the United States, making plans about the summer, about the winter, about breaks. I think every immigrant, every person has the right to seek the opportunity to come to the United States, to seek citizenship, and to live a life of dignity.
So, Amna, so important to hear these different voices. President Biden only in office, less than 2 weeks already. As we said, he's issued a flurry of executive orders, signaling this is a real priority for him.
Judy, that's absolutely right. It's a message he has sent from day one in office when he sat down and started to reverse and end some of those Trump-era immigration policies. As he said today, he doesn't feel he's making new law. He's ending bad policies. But take a look back at some of those steps he took on the very first day in office. He did end that travel ban, as we just heard. He reinstated DACA, the Obama-era program shielding from deportation people brought here as kids, and halted border wall construction. He also ended some of the stepped-up immigration enforcement that was going on from ICE. Judy, those were all things put into place unilaterally by President Trump and then ended unilaterally by President Biden. He continued that trend of unraveling Trump-era policies today. If you look at the list as it grew today with those new policies, he created the task force to reunify separated families. The previous government had basically abdicated responsibility. He ordered a review of the asylum policies from the previous administration, including that MPP program that keeps people in Mexico while U.S. cases unfold. And he ordered a review of the public charge rule, which basically made it harder for anyone to get citizenship if they ever access public support here in the U.S. Now, Judy, all of those send very strong signals. There's a change in messaging. We've gone from the restrictionist message of the Trump administration to a much more welcoming message under the Biden administration. But it's important to note the changes he made today to policy won't have immediate impact. Why? Because many of those reviews will themselves lead to more questions. How do you handle the case of 65,000 people who are stuck in Mexico waiting for their asylum cases to unfold? Where and how do you reunify some of those separated families? Do parents get some kind of protected status? And also, how do you handle some of the third country deals that were negotiated by Homeland Security with those countries of origin? All of those questions and those details will have to be worked out.
And Amna, all of these things are things that he can do on his own, executive orders, but he's also now putting out a sweeping immigration reform law proposal. Tell us what we know about that.
Judy, that's right. It's the most ambitious plan we've seen since the attempt back in 2013. Here's a quick look at what the plan entails. The centerpiece is this pathway to citizenship, an 8-year plan for an estimated 11 million undocumented people here after they get background checks and make tax payments. He wants to expand the refugee resettlement program, and he also wants to increase border security technology. Now, we should mention back in 2013, there were 13 Republican senators who signed on to the bill. 5 of them remain in the Senate. 2 of them, though, key members, Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham, have already thrown some cold water on the Biden plan. And when Minority Leader Mitch McConnell was asked about the plan, this is what he said. He called it a massive proposal for blanket amnesty that would gut enforcement of American laws and create huge incentives for people to rush here illegally. Judy, we've already seen a number of other Republicans expressing some kind of hesitation even today. So if all 50 Democrats unite around the plan, they need 10 Republicans to join them. It is an uphill battle for sure.
And finally, buttoning this up, Amna, the temperature's been so high under President Trump around immigration. What are the prospects that you're going to see common ground going forward?
Well, Judy, you're absolutely right. The temperature was raised under the last 4 years. The Biden administration hopes that these unilateral moves will help to act as a catalyst for the legislative ones. But if they're able to push through any kind of comprehensive reform, it is worth noting it would be the first comprehensive immigration reform in over 30 years in this country. Judy?
It would be such a huge development. Amna Nawaz, who's been following this issue so very closely. Amna, thank you. In the day's other news, Pete Buttigieg easily won Senate confirmation to be the Secretary of Transportation. The former South Bend, Indiana mayor and presidential candidate is the first openly gay person to be confirmed by the Senate for a cabinet post. Meanwhile, the Senate Veteran Affairs Committee approved Dennis McDonough's nomination for VA Secretary and sent it to the full Senate. The White House announced plans today to ship 1 million doses of coronavirus vaccines to some 6,500 pharmacies nationwide. COVID coordinator Jeff Zients said shipments begin next week.
This will provide more sites for people to get vaccinated in their communities, and it's an important component to delivering vaccines equitably. Sites are selected based on their ability to reach some of the populations most at risk for severe illness from COVID-19. Including socially vulnerable communities.
Meanwhile, Russian scientists reported that Russia's Sputnik vaccine is 91% effective. COVID vaccination sites across the northeastern U.S. are reopening after a major winter storm passed. The system pushed deeper into New England today. It had dumped 17 inches of snow in New York and up to 30 in New Jersey. Plow drivers in Pennsylvania and elsewhere kept busy clearing parking lots and streets today, and people struggled to dig out cars. In Russia today, a court ordered opposition leader Alexei Navalny back to prison for more than 2.5 years. After an argumentative hearing, he gestured a heart to his wife. The court found that he violated probation on an embezzlement charge that he says was fabricated. The decision was widely condemned, including by the new Biden administration.
What has happened with Mr. Navalny specifically, what has happened with the mass detentions of those who have bravely taken to the streets in the aftermath of Mr. Navalny's arrest. And of course, all of that we will account for in determining an appropriate policy course.
We'll take a closer look at the story after the news summary. The U.S. State Department now says what happened in Myanmar on Sunday was indeed a military coup. That finding today triggers a review of U.S. aid to the former Burma. Meanwhile, Aung San Suu Kyi, Myanmar's ousted civilian leader, remains under detention. Back in this country, 2 FBI agents were killed and 3 wounded in South Florida in one of the deadliest days in FBI history. They were trying to serve a warrant involving violence against children. The suspected gunman died after a standoff in a Fort Lauderdale suburb. A SWAT team stormed the apartment building where he was barricaded. In business news, Amazon announced that Jeff Bezos will step down as CEO later this year. He will become executive chairman instead. Bezos has been CEO since the founding of the company nearly 30 years ago. Now he is one of the world's richest people. Big tech and banks pushed Wall Street higher today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 475 points to close at 30,687. The Nasdaq rose 209 points, and the S&P 500 added 52. And 2 passings of note. Britain's Captain Tom Moore has died after contracting COVID-19. The World War II veteran became an online sensation early in the pandemic, doing laps in his backyard to raise $40 million for healthcare workers. Captain Tom Moore was 100 years old. There's also word that award-winning actor Hal Holbrook died last month in Beverly Hills, California. He won 5 Emmys and a Tony and gained movie fame as Deep Throat in the 1976 Watergate thriller All the President's Men. But he may be best known as Mark Twain in a one-man show that spanned 6 decades.
When the urge to exercise comes over me, I lie down until it passes away. Now, as for drinking, I have very strict rules about that. When others drink, I like to help.
Hal Holbrook was 95 years old.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
And now a closer look at the prison term given to Russian opposition activist Alexei Navalny. Since his return from Germany last month after an assassination attempt in Russia, tens of thousands have taken to the streets each weekend in protest. Special correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow reports.
He may have escaped death, but he hasn't escaped the reach of his government, which allegedly ordered his assassination. In a speech in court before the verdict, he denounced Vladimir Putin in stark terms and repeated this claim against the president.
No matter how much Putin pretends to be a geopolitician, he will go down in history as a poisoner.
After a trial which he and his campaign team call politically motivated, the Kremlin's most vehement critic is heading back behind bars. It's the outcome his supporters have been trying hard to prevent. Last weekend, residents of over 100 towns across Russia gathered for a second round of protests. 20-year-old Christina is among those who wants change. Vladimir Putin has been in power as president or prime minister for her whole life.
I came out because I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of any of this. I want to speak my mind for freedom of thought, for freedom of action in our country.
A lack of freedom, lack of wealth, a lack of justice, all complaints at the largest unsanctioned nationwide protests in modern Russian history.
In order for the authorities to hear us, we have to come out every day.
The authorities want to stop them. Within minutes of arriving, Christina was detained. She joined the ranks of more than 5,000 across Russia who found themselves in police vans on Sunday, joining 4,000 detained a week before. And police were willing to use baton strikes and tasers to get them inside, a level of violence not yet seen. Spearheading the protests are members of Alexei Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation. Its executive director lives in the UK after a warrant was issued for his arrest. Vladimir Shurkov says Navalny could yet be released if enough pressure builds on President Putin.
It's very important for us to keep the pressure, and we're lobbying in the international arena for the Western governments to take a more proactive stance.
The eyes of the world are now on Russia. The US and the European Union denounced the crackdown, and the United Nations Security Council is discussing Russia's treatment of protesters and Navalny's detention. Opposition activists are pressing for sanctions. Without them, they fear further repression. The Kremlin says its response is proportionate and legal. People are free to express their opinions, but must do so within the boundaries of the law. But officials say the protesters' complaints are not valid.
Navalny is a person who specifically helps the enemies of Russia to defame the image of Russia in the eyes of the world. He operates with lies. His so-called anti-corruption foundation, unfortunately, has nothing in common with reality.
Its most recent investigation accused President Putin of corruption directly. The video on YouTube has received over 100 million views. Supporters vow to continue Navalny's investigative work, but his political movement could flounder without its leader.
With Alexei Navalny sentenced to prison and calls for mass protest, this could be a pivotal moment for the campaign. The way the state responds could galvanize more support or quell the protests entirely.
Despite opposition momentum, leading political scientists don't expect regime change anytime soon.
It's only in fairy tales that a revolutionary crowd takes over the palace of the dictator. This does not happen.
But these protests have stretched across the breadth of Russia. They could mark the beginning of a deepening political consciousness.
What we are going to experience, I think, is such a change both in the public mood and in the public mass political behavior, not just centered in Moscow, St. Petersburg and bigger cities, but spread across Russia and reaching maybe to those social stratas that were not politicized before.
Today's ruling may have taken away Alexei Navalny's freedom, but for now it seems only to have increased his impact. The Kremlin will hope that with imprisonment his notoriety fades. His supporters hope it marks the start of a political revolution. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stuart Smith in Moscow.
Concerns are growing about variants of the coronavirus and how effective vaccines will be in the months to come. British authorities today said they believe a variant first identified in the United Kingdom may indeed stunt the effect of some vaccines. Paul Turner is a professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at the Yale School of Medicine and a specialist in how genes mutate. And he joins me now. Dr. Turner, thank you so much for being with us. How concerned should people be right now about these variants?
Well, I guess this is what we have expected to occur. The viruses are often quite good at mutating and evolving. So there is some reason for concern. We would want to know that the vaccines that we're producing are going to be effective against the major variants of the virus. And if we have new variants with greater transmissibility, that certainly stresses our healthcare systems. But we also want to know, are these variants able to escape our medicines more effectively? Can they escape the vaccines that we're producing? So this is a worrisome thing that we should be monitoring.
What do we know right now about whether the vaccines that are out there, the Pfizer, the Moderna that have been approved in the U.S. for emergency use, whether they protect enough against the new variants?
Well, the data are still rolling in, and I think people are anxious to answer those questions more conclusively. Some of the data show that there is this measurable efficacy for the vaccines in dealing with these new strains, but not as much efficacy as the standard strains that we've been dealing with so far. So this has to be figured out explicitly. There are more data coming in. I'm as anxious as anybody, but this is something we don't quite know yet, but we need to do the rigorous studies to figure it out.
Well, the report that I just cited from British authorities today about the UK variant, of course, has people concerned. I know one aspect of this is it's been reported that at least the vaccines protect against severe cases and protect against ultimately death. So there's still some good protection they're providing. I mean, can we at least be confident of that?
Yes, we'll have to see, but I think we can be confident that if these vaccines are quite good at dealing with the most horrible outcomes, the deaths, then this is something that